Washington, D.C., April 17, 2024, late afternoon. Rush hour. Hundreds of people returning home, unaware that in a few minutes their lives would be marked by something that never appeared in the news. A subway train was forcibly stopped inside a tunnel in the United States Capitol. Armed men entered. Fear spread. Time seemed to slow down. What no one there knew was that Jesus was inside that subway, silently observing everything. In this video, you will hear a story reconstructed from testimonies, recordings, and accounts that have never been officially released. It's not a story about shootings. It's not a story about armed heroes. It's a story about the exact moment when everything could have ended in tragedy, but didn't. Before we continue, welcome to this channel of untold true stories about Jesus. Leave a comment telling us where you're listening from right now and the exact time. Like this video, because it really helps this type of content reach more people. Now take a deep breath, because what happened inside that subway was something nobody was prepared to see. Washington, D.C., Wednesday, April 17, 2024. Green line of the metro, Greenbelt direction. The 6:42 p.m. train left Gallery Place Station like any other late afternoon train. Tired executives, students with headphones, a nurse clutching her cell phone tightly, two Latino tourists silently looking at a map. Nothing out of the ordinary. The internal cameras recorded everything, but nobody there was thinking about cameras. They were only thinking about getting home. In the middle carriage, near door 4, there was a man who attracted little attention and yet seemed out of place. Simple clothes, light shirt, sleeves slightly rolled up, short, well-groomed beard, a look too serene for that time of day. He was standing holding the overhead bar, observing the people, not his cell phone. Later, many would say the same thing. I can't explain it, but that man didn't seem to be in a hurry. At 6:47 p.m., the train decelerated abruptly between the U Street and Columbia Heights stations. First came the eerie silence, then the dry impact. The subway stopped in the tunnel. Some passengers thought it was an electrical fault. Others complained quietly. One woman sighed too loudly. Then the emergency lights came on, and the sound system hissed. Attention, remain in your places. Before the announcement was finished, a violent metallic noise echoed from the front of the train. Something had been forced open. Armed men entered the first carriage. They weren't ordinary robbers. They didn't shout like desperate thieves. They moved methodically. They wore dark jackets, hoods, and gloves. They carried short, well-maintained weapons. One of them had a radio strapped to his shoulder. No one screams. No one runs. The sentence was spoken calmly. In less than 30 seconds, they were already spreading through the train cars. They weren't stealing cell phones. They weren't asking for wallets. That was the most frightening thing. A teenage girl started to cry. Her mother tried to cover her mouth. A man slowly raised his hands, without knowing why. In the middle carriage, one of the mobsters stopped suddenly. He looked down for the man in the light-colored shirt. There was a second of silence between them. Too short for anyone to notice, too long to be forgotten. The mobster looked away first, and he moved on. The man remained where he was. He didn't sit down. He didn't hide. He just watched, as if he knew exactly what was going on. The group's leader was named Marcus Reed. At least that was the name that appeared in later FBI reports. Marcus wasn't impulsive. He wasn't young. He'd done worse things than that, but never inside a federal subway system in the heart of the capital. The operation had a specific motive. A man hidden on the train, an informant, a traitor, someone who owed a lot of money and information. He's here, for sure. Then we think so. The mobsters began to go face to face. They weren't looking for fear. They were looking for guilt. Meanwhile, panic was growing. An elderly woman began to pray quietly. A young man tried to film her and had his cell phone snatched from his hand and smashed on the ground. I told no one to record. At the back of the train car, the bearded man observed everything. His gaze did not judge. It did not condemn. It did not threaten. He simply saw. When one of the mobsters shoved a passenger with unnecessary force, something changed. Not in the atmosphere, in him. A witness would later say, it was as if the air became heavy. I can't explain it. The man took a step forward, just one. One of the criminals noticed. Hey, you, stay where you are. The man stopped. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't argue. He didn't lower his head. Marcus Reed looked in that direction, and he frowned. Something was wrong. He had already faced police officers, rival gangs, hired assassins, but that man, he didn't react like anyone else. Who are you? Marcus asked, without knowing why. The man replied in a low, firm voice, someone who is watching everything. That didn't make sense, but for some reason, Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. At that moment in the first carriage, one of the mobsters shouted, "I found the guy!" The traitor was there, but while everyone turned to the front of the train, the man in the light-colored shirt continued watching, and at that moment, nobody there knew. They hadn't stopped just any subway. They had stopped a subway with Jesus inside. The man they were looking for was named Ethan Moore, 38 years old, a third-party logistics analyst, no significant criminal record, too ordinary an appearance for someone who owed millions and carried enough secrets to destroy powerful people. Ethan was sitting in the first carriage near the emergency exit. From the moment the train stopped, he knew. She knew because she recognized the pattern. She knew because she had seen men like that before, only never so close. When the mobster grabbed his collar and pulled him off the bench, the silence in the carriage became absolute. Even the child's crying stopped. "Did you think you could just disappear?" the man growled. Ethan didn't answer. He was sweating. He was trembling, not from courage, from miscalculation. Marcus Reed approached slowly. He looked at the traitor's face as one might review a poorly signed contract. "You were expensive." Ethan tried to speak. No sound came out. He was pushed against the wall of the train car. In the middle carriage, some people began to pray silently. Others closed their eyes. Others watched, frozen. The man in the light-colored shirt was still standing. He didn't look away. He didn't seem shocked. He seemed attentive, like someone watching something whose ending they already know, but still suffering through the process. Marcus made a hand gesture. "Take him away." Ethan was dragged to the center of the train, past terrified passengers. His feet pounded on the floor. One of his shoes came off. When he passed the middle carriage, something happened. Ethan looked up for a second, and he saw the man. Later, in his recorded testimony, which was never publicly shown, he would say, "It wasn't like seeing an ordinary person. It was like being seen, like he knew everything I had done." Ethan started to cry. "Please," one of the mobsters laughed. "Now do you remember God?" The bearded man took 2 steps forward. This time nobody stopped him. Marcus Reed realized. "Hey!" The man stopped a few meters away. "You don't have to do that," he said. The sentence contained no threat, nor a plea. It was a fact. The entire train car seemed to hold its breath. Marcus narrowed his eyes. "And who are you to say that?" The man looked around, at the passengers, at Ethan, at the criminals. "Someone who sees what happens next." One of the mobsters got nervous. "Boss, this is strange." Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years. Doubt. He moved closer. "After what?" the man replied with absolute calm. "Once you cross a line from which there is no return." The silence was broken by a shout on the radio. "Movement in the tunnels. Police on their way. Time has run out." Marcus made a decision. "That's enough. Let's end this now." He pulled out his gun. Ethan fell to his knees. At that exact moment, the train lights flickered. They didn't turn them off. They blinked. A dry, crackling sound ran through the train car, like electricity in the air. The man in the light-colored shirt raised his hand. He didn't touch anyone. He didn't push anyone. He simply raised his hand. Enough. The word resonated in a way that no one could explain afterward. Marcus's arm trembled. The finger on the trigger didn't obey. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. One of the mobsters took a step back. Another one dropped the gun. Ethan, crying, lifted his face. "He saw me." The man approached Ethan, knelt before him and spoke softly. "You made a mistake, but you're still breathing. They're going to kill me." "Not today." Marcus felt his heart race. He had already sent men to their deaths without blinking, but now something was out of control. "Who are you?" he shouted. The man stood up slowly. He looked directly at Marcus Reed, and he replied, "Someone who has already been where you're going." At that moment, the sound of sirens began to echo through the tunnels. The police were arriving, but the real siege didn't come from outside. The sound of the sirens wasn't loud yet. It was distant, muffled by the concrete of the tunnel. But anyone who had dealt with the police knew that sound doesn't disappear. It just gets closer. Marcus Reed felt sweat trickle down his back. He wasn't afraid of the police. He'd been through worse. What bothered him was the man. That damned man in the light-colored shirt. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He didn't try to play the hero. He simply stood there, watching. And it wasn't a look of defiance, nor of cheap pity. It was a look that seemed to pierce through the layers, as if it could see past decisions, sleepless nights, choices Marcus never told anyone about. "Boss," whispered one of the mobsters, the youngest. "This isn't right." Marcus turned around quickly. "Mind your own business." But the truth is that nobody there was in their element anymore. A woman in the corner of the carriage began to cry again, but now it wasn't pure panic. panic. It was something else. Hope mixed with fear. A black man in a worn suit murmured repeatedly, "God, God." The entire subway seemed suspended in an odd interval, as if time had slowed down. Marcus pointed the gun again at Ethan, who was kneeling on the ground. "This ends now." The bearded man did not move. "You can still get out of here in one piece." The phrase wasn't said as a threat. It was said as a diagnosis. Marcus exploded. "Do you think I don't know how to get out?" He took 2 steps forward. "I leave from anywhere. I always have." The man nodded slowly. Yes, that simple response disarmed more than any confrontation, and he always left something behind. Marcus felt his stomach churn. Images he hadn't remembered in years surfaced without warning. His younger brother in handcuffs, his mother sitting in the kitchen, staring at the floor, the first gun, too cold in his hand. "Shut up!" The scream echoed through the train car. One of the mobsters lost control. "Boss, let's go! The police!" Marcus spun the gun and fired into the air. The bang was deafening. Screams erupted. People threw themselves to the ground. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. The man in the light-colored shirt didn't move. When the echo ceased, he spoke again. "Violence won't give you back control." "I'm in control!" Marcus shouted, but his voice cracked at the end. And that's when something happened. One of the mobsters, the most experienced one, slowly lowered his weapon. "Marcus!" "Not now." "No, listen. Look around." Marcus looked, and he saw. He saw the men themselves, nervous, sweating, shifting their positions. He saw the fear, not of the passengers, but within the group itself. He saw Ethan, broken but alive, and he saw the man. His gaze didn't accuse, but it didn't absolve either. It was a look that said, "You choose the next step." The radio crackled again. "Teams in position, negotiations underway." Marcus knew that time was up. He took a deep breath. "Everyone to the back of the train car." They obeyed. Too quickly, perhaps. He approached the man. "Do you think I'm going to drop everything because of a speech?" "No." "Then why are you here?" The man took a second to answer. "Because someone needs to be a witness when you make your decision." Marcus laughed nervously. "Decide what? Who are you when nobody's telling you what to do?" The sirens were now clear. Blue lights began to reflect off the tunnel walls. The police were shouting orders from outside. "This is the Metropolitan Police Department. Drop your weapons!" The young mobster started to cry. "I don't want to die here." The experienced man closed his eyes. Marcus felt the weight of the years fall upon him all at once. He looked at Ethan, then at the passengers, then at the man. "If I drop the gun," he murmured, "I lose everything." The man replied, almost in a whisper, "You've already lost. The question is what you can still salvage." There was a long silence. Then Marcus Reed did something that nobody expected. He dropped the weapon. She fell to the ground with a dry sound. The entire train car held its breath. One of the mobsters fell to his knees. Another dropped the radio. The police began to advance. Ethan collapsed to the floor, crying like a child. Marcus stood there, staring at his own empty hands. "Is it over?" he asked. The man in the light-colored shirt took a step back. "For today." When the police entered, guns pointed, shouts, orders, handcuffs. No one noticed. When the man slowly moved away to the back of the carriage. When it was all over. When the criminals were on the ground. When the passengers were being removed one by one. A policewoman asked a woman, "Who initiated the surrender?" The woman replied, confused, "A man, I think." She looked around. The man was no longer there. All that remained was a strange sense of peace in a place where there should have been only trauma, and a phrase that many would repeat later. It looked like someone entered the subway just to prevent something worse. The official report described the incident as a criminal interruption followed by spontaneous surrender. This was the version that reached the newspapers. But anyone who was on that subway knew nothing spontaneous happened. That night, Washington didn't sleep well. Traffic was disrupted. Helicopters flew over the northwest sector. The Green Line was closed for hours. Security analysts tried to understand how an armed group had managed to stop an entire train without activating the automatic emergency systems beforehand. The FBI took over the case that same morning. Marcus Reed and his men were taken to separate facilities. None of them resisted. None of them tried to escape. That, in itself, was already strange. But the Mafia's real mistake began later. During questioning, everyone involved each, without exception, made the same mistake. They spoke about the man. The youngest was the first to mention it. There was someone there. Someone who? I don't know. A normal guy. The agent looked up. Normal how? The young man swallowed hard. Too calm. Another mobster, questioned hours later, said something similar. He wasn't a hostage. He wasn't a police officer. He wasn't one of us. So who was it? Silence. Marcus Reed was the last to speak. Sitting in the White Room, his hands handcuffed to the table, he looked older than in the records. Sunken eyes. Unshaven. Did you order the surrender? The agent asked. Marcus took a deep breath. No. Then why did you drop the gun? He took a while to reply. Because at that moment, I understood. Did you understand what? Marcus looked up. That I wasn't in control. The agent frowned. Who was there? Marcus opened his mouth to reply and closed it again. That won't be on the list, will it? It depends on what you say. Marcus rested his elbows on the table. There was a man in the middle carriage. We already know. No, you know he was there. You just don't know who he was. The agent maintained a neutral stance. Then tell me. Marcus shook his head slowly. If I tell you, you won't write it down. Why? Because it doesn't fit in the report. The recordings show a silence of almost 20 seconds. He didn't threaten me, Marcus continued. He didn't beg. He didn't negotiate. And even then you dropped the gun, because it was as if he knew everything I was going to do before I even decided. The agent took a deep breath. Marcus, you're talking about fear. No. Then what about? Marcus swallowed hard. To be seen. The agent wrote something down, but then crossed it out. Who was the man? Marcus closed his eyes. If I tell you the name, you'll laugh. Try it. Marcus spoke softly, almost inaudibly. Jesus. The recording shows the agent clearing his throat and immediately changing the subject. This pattern repeated itself. Whenever the name came up, the interrogation was redirected. Whenever the subject came up, it was treated as collective post-traumatic stress. But there was a problem. The cameras. The interior images of the subway were analyzed frame by frame. The man appears from various angles. He entered Gallery Place station. He remained in the middle carriage. He did not run. He did not hide. He was never seen leaving. This raised an uncomfortable question. Where did he go? Witnesses gave consistent descriptions. Short beard, simple clothes, a calm look. A woman stated, he looked at me and I stopped trembling. A student said, when I thought I was going to die, I saw him and I wasn't afraid. These testimonies were not included in the final report. They were archived. The Mafia's mistake was thinking that the worst was over with the arrests, but the effect was different. Ethan Moore, the traitor, accepted the deal. He gave up names. He gave up routes. He gave up money. During his final testimony, he asked for something strange. I want to know if you found him. Who? The man. There were no unidentified civilians. Ethan started to cry. He told me I was still breathing. Mr. Moore, you were under extreme threat. No, I was under mercy. The case was officially closed 3 weeks later, but among the agents, one question remained unanswered. How could an armed, trained, and violent group lose control without anyone firing a shot at them? One analyst summed it up in one sentence outside of the report. They weren't wrong to stop the subway. They were wrong not to realize who was already inside. In the days following the subway incident, something silent began to spread among those involved. It wasn't rumor. It wasn't mass hysteria. It was more subtle, an internal shift, difficult to record in reports, impossible to ignore in behaviors. Marcus Reed was transferred to a maximum security wing while awaiting trial. He was a man who, for years, had slept soundly after ordering acts that others would never confess to, not even in their wildest dreams. But now, Marcus wasn't sleeping. Prison doctors noted the same pattern night after night. Sudden awakenings, rapid breathing, profuse sweating. Nightmares, asked the psychiatrist. Marcus hesitated. No. So what? Dreams where I wake up. The doctor wrote something down without understanding it. Marcus began to speak less. When he did speak, he chose each word with unusual care. I thought the fear was theirs, he said one day, looking out the window of the living room. But inside that subway, it wasn't. Whose was it? Marcus closed his eyes. My. Meanwhile, the other Mafia members exhibited similar behavior. One asked to see a chaplain. Another refused to leave his cell for days. The youngest attempted suicide and was stopped by a guard who later stated he felt a strange urge to check that cell before hours. The guards were commenting amongst themselves, I've never seen this kind of breakup. They're not afraid of the sentence. They're afraid of something that's already happened. Outside of prison, the passengers also did not return to their normal routine. A teacher requested leave of absence. A lawyer quit his job. A nurse started a attending a church she hadn't visited in years. None of them said exactly why, but they all spoke of the same feeling. It was as if something had seen me when I wasn't prepared. The camera recordings continued to be analyzed by a small technical team. Nothing out of the ordinary, no obvious malfunctions, no trickery, but one detail persisted. At the exact moment Marcus drops the gun, the cameras experience a micro-interference. Not enough to erase images, but enough to create a gap of missing frames. Milliseconds. Time is technically irrelevant. Time, strangely symbolic. The man simply doesn't appear when he leaves. One analyst commented jokingly, maybe he never went in. Nobody laughed. Ethan Moore, under protection, moved to another state. He changed his name. He changed his appearance, but it didn't change what it was carrying. During a mandatory psychological evaluation, I said something that made the therapist pause the session. I spent years running away from what I should have done. And now I know that someone knows. Who? Ethan took a deep breath. That's what scares me the most. The police officially closed the case. The newspapers moved on to other topics. Washington continued, but within the system, something had changed. A veteran officer commented in a hallway, I've seen hardened criminals break, but never like this. Like this, as if fear had switched sides. The man in the light-colored shirt was never identified. No record, no name. But a few weeks later, something curious happened. An anonymous report arrived at the department. No sender, no signature. It contained only one typed sentence. Not all rescues involve escape. Some involve choice. The document was archived. But an agent kept a copy, and whenever someone asked about the subway incident, he would say, it's been resolved, and then, lower down, but it's not over, because everyone in that train car knew the danger didn't end when the weapons fell. It ended when someone decided not to pull the trigger, and this decision was not made under duress. It was taken under duress. The subway incident was officially closed in Washington, like so many others, with protocols, case numbers, and brief press releases. The public learned the essentials. Armed men, criminal disruption, surrender, no one dead. A serious event, but resolved. What wasn't reported was everything that came after. Months passed. The train involved returned to service after maintenance. The stations resumed normal operation. For those who passed through the tunnels every day, nothing indicated that there, at a specific point on the Green Line, the weather had behaved differently. But for those who were on that train, the world didn't exactly go back to the way it was. Some passengers later recognized each other by chance, in supermarket queues, at train stations, in churches. They exchanged long, silent glances. They didn't ask, were you there? Because they knew. It was like recognizing someone who had survived the same shipwreck. One of them, a middle-aged man who worked in public accounting, wrote a personal statement months later. Not for the police, not for the press, for himself. I didn't see a miracle. I saw a choice, and that changed me more than anything supernatural. The text was never published, but it circulated among a few in printed copies. Marcus Reed was convicted. The sentence was long, just according to the law. He accepted it without appeal. During the final hearing, when the judge asked if he wanted to say anything, Marcus simply replied, I understood late, but I understood. He didn't explain any further. In prison, he became a different man, not through dramatic conversion, not through speeches, just different. He helped quietly. He avoided conflict. He spent hours reading. When asked, he said he was learning to be silent. A guard once remarked, it's as if he'd met someone on that subway and didn't want to disappoint them again. Ethan Moore disappeared off the radar. He fulfilled the agreement. He rebuilt his life with difficulty, but he maintained a strange habit. Every Wednesday, at the same time as the incident, he would stop whatever he was doing for 1 minute, just to remind myself that I'm still breathing, I once said. The subway recordings have been permanently archived. The file has been sealed. But one coach, before leaving his post, left a handwritten note in a personal notebook. I didn't find enough technical errors to explain what's missing. This notebook was never requested. The most curious thing is that over the following months, similar accounts began to emerge, not in newspapers, not in official bulletins, but in discreet conversations. People in extreme situations described the presence of someone who didn't interfere directly, but changed everything. None of these accounts were treated as fact, and perhaps it shouldn't, because what happened on that subway wasn't supported by evidence. It was supported by consequences. No one died, but many many ceased to be who they were. And this, for those who investigate violence, is a rare finding. A federal agent summarized it years later, already retired. If it had been an armed hero, we would understand. If it had been an undercover cop, we would have filed it away. But it was just someone. He paused. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to explain. The man in the light-colored shirt was never identified. There is no entry record. There is no exit record. But something remains. Every time someone revisits that case, the same unspoken question arises: what if he wasn't there to save anyone, but to be seen? Perhaps the story was never about stopping a crime. Perhaps it was about exposing the exact moment when someone chooses who they will be. In the end, there were no witnesses to a miracle. There were witnesses to a decision, and this doesn't make headlines. It doesn't generate statistics. It doesn't fit into a report, but it remains. How did someone remain in that train car for a few minutes outside of time? Someone who didn't run, didn't scream, didn't fight. He simply observed. And when it was all over, when the doors opened and the people left, nobody noticed when he was no longer there. Perhaps because it was never about coming in or going out. Perhaps because some presences don't occupy physical space, just awareness. And so the subway started running again. Washington continued at its own pace. The world remained noisy. But for those who were there, one thing became clear. They thought they had stopped a subway train, but unbeknownst to them, they had stopped in front of something much bigger. And that never made the news. Some stories don't end when the doors open. The subway was back in service that night. Technicians cleared the tracks, employees cleaned the car, and the city resumed its hurried pace. For Washington, it was just another serious incident resolved without fatalities. Just another number in safety reports. A brief note from behind the scenes of power. But for those who were inside, that night never ended, because what remained was not the fear. It was the question. Passengers went on with their lives carrying something they couldn't name. It wasn't ordinary trauma. It wasn't panic. It was a different awareness, as if something had been displaced within them, something that no longer allowed them to pretend that certain things didn't exist. An elderly woman who was sitting near door number 3 began to write every night, not about the crime, not about the armed men. She wrote about small choices, words she left unsaid, gestures she postponed, apologies she never made. She told her daughter, weeks later, "I realized that surviving is not the same as living right." A young student who nearly fainted when the shot was fired into the air changed his university course. He abandoned economics and switched to studying philosophy. When asked why, he simply replied, "I saw something that no longer fit into the numbers." These changes didn't show up in the statistics, but they did happen. Marcus Reed, now convicted, spent years trying to understand what had really happened inside that subway car. In letters never sent, written on pages torn from simple notebooks, he repeated the same idea with different words. "I always thought power was about making someone bow their head, but that night I was the only one who couldn't hold their gaze." Marcus did not become a preacher. He did not try to justify his crimes with belated faith. He simply accepted something he had never accepted before: responsibility without escape. During a conversation with a prison chaplain, he said something that only remained in the memory of those who heard it. "If that wasn't Jesus, then it was the closest I've ever come to understanding what he means." And perhaps that's the most uncomfortable part of the story, because the man on the subway didn't do anything spectacular. He did not heal the wounded. He did not physically stop criminals. He did not make grandiose speeches. He was just there, and that was enough to break hardened, armed men accustomed to violence. This raises a question that many prefer to avoid. What if Jesus doesn't appear as we expect, but as we need him to? Not with thunder, but with silence. Not with imposition, but with presence. Ethan Moore, the man who was supposed to die that night, lived the rest of his life knowing that he wasn't spared by cunning or chance. He lived with the certainty that someone saw him at his worst moment and yet didn't discard him. Years later, when asked by an independent journalist what had changed in him, he replied, "I thought I had escaped justice, but I didn't escape its gaze." The subway case never became an official documentary. It never got a series. It never received in-depth analysis on major channels, perhaps because it doesn't fit into easy narratives. There is no traditional hero. There is no villain defeated by violence. There is no satisfactory technical explanation explanation, there are only consequences, and consequences are difficult to sell as spectacle, but they are impossible to ignore for those who experience them. What is most unsettling about this story is not the question who was the man, but another far more unsettling one. What would have happened if he hadn't been there? Perhaps the subway would have been just another urban tragedy. Perhaps names would have been added to lists. Perhaps families would have been burying someone, but that's not how it was, and nobody can prove why. Perhaps because some things can't be proven, they're simply acknowledged. According to ancient accounts, when Jesus walked among the people, many also did not know who he was. Some ignored him, others mocked him, others only realized it too late, and perhaps, even today, it continues to be so. Perhaps he is still present in places where no one expects him, on buses, subways, in lines, hospitals, in moments of choice, not to intervene like a movie character, but to observe who we are when no one is acting. This story doesn't ask you to believe in anything specific. It simply invites honesty. Because if that man wasn't Jesus, then something even more disturbing remains. The idea that a mere presence can disarm violence. And if it was Jesus, then he continues doing what he always did, appearing unannounced, changing destinies without fanfare, and leaving no trace, only transformation. In the end, the subway continued. The people continued. The world remained noisy. But something remained in that tunnel, invisible to the eye, impossible to capture on camera, a silent reminder that sometimes the greatest miracle is not what happens outside, but what fails to happen inside us. And perhaps that's why this story never made the news, because it doesn't talk about death, it talks about choice. And choices, when they are genuine, don't need headlines, they simply remain.